Let me tell you something most people won't admit. The reason they don't value you isn't because you're not enough. It's because you never walked away long enough for them to feel your absence. People don't appreciate what's always there. They don't respect what's always available. But the moment you pull back, just once, you'll see exactly who was benefiting from your presence and who was truly deserving of it. And that moment will change everything. People don't value what they believe they'll never lose because certainty makes people complacent, and complacency makes them blind. When you're always available, always understanding, always giving second and third chances, people start to treat your presence like background noise, something that's just there, no effort required. They assume you'll stay because you always have, and that assumption becomes the very thing that lowers their respect for you. Humans naturally undervalue anything that asks for nothing in return. Effort creates appreciation, and lack of effort creates entitlement. The more consistently you show up for people who don't reciprocate, the more they begin to believe your loyalty is unconditional, even when they haven't earned it. You become predictable, and predictability, in the wrong hands, becomes a disadvantage. Your value doesn't disappear, but their ability to recognize it gets diluted by their expectation that you'll never leave. And that's exactly why walking away becomes the wake-up call that forces them to confront the truth they've been ignoring for far too long. Walking away is powerful because it disrupts the pattern they relied on, and that disruption exposes how much they took for granted. People don't learn from comfort, they learn from contrast. Your presence versus your absence, your effort versus their lack of it, your consistency versus their neglect. The moment you step back, their mind starts to recalibrate, because absence removes the illusion of infinite access. They begin to notice the silence, the space, the missing energy that they assumed would always be there. What they dismissed suddenly becomes rare. What they ignored becomes obvious. What they undervalued becomes important. Walking away creates a psychological gap they can't fill with excuses or distractions. It forces them to reckon with the truth that your presence wasn't guaranteed. It was a privilege they didn't protect. And sometimes that realization doesn't come in a gentle whisper. It hits them like a consequence they never imagined they'd face. When you stay beyond the point of respect, you teach people how little effort they need to invest to keep you. You teach them that you'll tolerate being overlooked, that your feelings can be postponed, that your needs can wait indefinitely while theirs take priority. Even if you don't say these words aloud, your behavior communicates them with absolute clarity. People respond not to what you ask for, but to what you accept, and every time you stay in a space where your value is minimized, you reinforce that minimizing you is acceptable. But the moment you walk away, the dynamic flips entirely. What they once dismissed becomes the very thing they chase, because scarcity activates appreciation. They finally feel the weight of losing someone who gave more, tried harder, and cared deeper than anyone else in the room. And in that moment, the respect that should have existed all along finally rises to the surface, not because they've changed, but because your absence forced them to see what your presence was worth. Walking away is not about punishment, it's about alignment. It's about recognizing when your value is being wasted in places that can't hold it. It's about refusing to shrink, bend, overgive, or prove yourself to people who only understand your worth when you're no longer standing in front of them. Sometimes it takes distance for people to see clearly. Sometimes it takes silence for people to finally hear. Sometimes it takes your absence for people to recognize the magnitude of your presence. And while their realization might come late, yours arrives right on time. You were never asking for too much. You were asking the wrong people. Walking away isn't the moment they lose you. It's the moment you return to yourself, reclaiming your worth without waiting for anyone else to validate it. Proximity without boundaries turns your presence into something people assume they're entitled to, and entitlement is what makes them forget the value of what they're receiving. When you give unlimited access without requiring respect, accountability, or reciprocity, people begin to treat your effort like a subscription they never have to pay for. They stop noticing your consistency because it becomes the baseline they rely on. They stop appreciating your kindness because it becomes the default they expect. And slowly, without meaning to, they start taking more than they give because nothing in the dynamic challenges them to rise to your level. They start believing your patience is endless, your forgiveness is automatic, and your support is guaranteed. But the truth is simple. Anything that feels guaranteed gets taken for granted, especially when people are accustomed to your generosity but not trained to respect your boundaries. And this happens not because they're bad, but because you accidentally taught them that effort wasn't required. Boundaries are not walls meant to keep people out. They are standards meant to teach people how to treat you. When you don't communicate or enforce those standards, you leave the relationship open to assumption, and assumptions are rarely accurate or fair. Without boundaries, people decide the rules on your behalf, usually in ways that benefit them more than you. They take shortcuts, offer less, invest minimally, and still assume your presence will remain unchanged. Your silence becomes permission, your tolerance becomes acceptance, and your kindness becomes an unspoken contract that says, "Do whatever you want, I'll adjust." But the moment you draw a line, everything shifts. The dynamic resets, the imbalance becomes visible, your expectations become clear, and suddenly the privilege of your proximity becomes something they have to earn, not something they get for free. Boundaries create the structure necessary for respect, and without them, people aren't motivated to recognize or honor your value. The danger of giving access without standards is that entitlement grows quietly, showing up in subtle signs you often ignore at first. They start showing up late, emotionally or physically, because they know you'll wait. They stop prioritizing your feelings because you never push back. They start giving excuses instead of effort because you've made effort optional. They become comfortable in the idea that no matter how they treat you, you'll still be there tomorrow offering the same energy, the same support, the same commitment. And while you may rationalize their behavior at first, they're busy, they're stressed. They didn't mean it. You slowly begin to realize that what you're calling understanding is actually self-neglect. The lack of boundaries becomes a silent agreement that your needs come second. And once that pattern is established, it becomes incredibly difficult for people to suddenly treat you differently. Entitlement, once nurtured, expects continuity, not correction. Walking away is what finally breaks that entitlement, not through anger or confrontation, but through clarity and recalibration. When you step back, the imbalance becomes undeniable. The absence of your effort exposes how little they were giving. The silence of your energy reveals the depth of their dependency on it. They feel the gap you once filled so effortlessly, and for the first time, they realize how much you were contributing to the relationship's stability. Walking away is the reset button that boundaries couldn't achieve because absence eliminates the possibility of negotiation. It forces them to confront the reality that your presence was not unconditional. It was simply unspoken. Now, without access, they face the truth. They didn't lose you because you were demanding. They lost you because they assumed you would never demand anything at all. Proximity without boundaries may feel generous at first, but it ultimately erodes your sense of self and teaches others to undervalue what you bring. You deserve relationships, connections, and environments where your presence is respected, where effort is mutual, and where access is treated as a privilege. When you begin to enforce boundaries, you stop overfunctioning for people who underfunction for you. And when you finally walk away from dynamics built on entitlement, you remind yourself, and everyone else, that your value is not something to be taken lightly. Boundaries protect your worth, but walking away reclaims it, making room for people who will treat your presence with the respect it always deserved. When people become accustomed to your consistency, they slowly start believing that your effort is something automatic rather than intentional, and that shift is what makes them stop valuing what you bring. You show up, you give, you support, you listen, And over time, your reliability becomes the quiet engine running everything in the background. But engines go unnoticed when they never fail. People don't appreciate the structure you provide because they no longer see the work behind it. They assume your emotional labor is effortless. They assume your time is unlimited. They assume your energy has no cost. And the moment something becomes assumed, it stops being appreciated. This is how people unknowingly train themselves to undervalue you by mistaking your intentional effort for an unchanging part of their environment. There's a point where reliability is no longer seen as a strength, but treated as an expectation, and expectations, when left unexamined, evolve into entitlement. They stop thanking you because they no longer see your actions as favors. They stop noticing your sacrifices because they've normalized them. They stop giving effort in return because they assume you'll fill the gaps. And when you keep showing up the same way despite the imbalance, they take the comfort you provide and convert it into permission to do less. You're not just the one who shows up. You're the one who shows up even when they don't. And the more you tolerate this silent decline in reciprocity, the more you reinforce the idea that your needs and boundaries don't require attention. In their mind, nothing is wrong because you're still there. The dangerous part is that undervaluation rarely starts with disrespect. It starts with comfort. People get comfortable with your predictability, comfortable with your patience, comfortable with your willingness to understand and forgive, and comfort, unchecked, is what makes people careless. They don't intend to hurt you. They simply stop seeing the risk of losing you. They assume your loyalty is unconditional. They assume your commitment is permanent. They assume your tolerance is endless. And because there's no tension, no consequences, no friction, they don't feel the need to adjust their behavior. Comfort blurs the edges of appreciation, and soon the effort you put in becomes invisible to the very people who benefit most from it. People value what they fear losing, and they invest in what requires their participation. When you remove the possibility of loss, when you stay no matter how imbalanced things become, people subconsciously stop trying. They stop prioritizing you because they don't feel the urgency to do so. They stop nurturing the connection because nothing challenges them to improve. Humans are wired to respond to scarcity, not abundance, which is why your constant availability becomes the very reason they start neglecting the relationship. Your presence becomes so consistent that they forget it's a choice. They forget you could leave. They forget that the version of you they depend on is not guaranteed to last if they don't contribute something meaningful in return. The moment you decide to pull back, even slightly, is when everything becomes visible again. They notice the absence of your effort. They feel the space where your consistency used to be. They realize the emotional labor you carried without acknowledgement. They begin to understand how much of the relationship's health relied on you showing up fully while they showed up partially. And in that moment of discomfort, clarity hits them. They weren't matching your investment. They weren't appreciating your presence. They weren't valuing your reliability until it was gone, or at least threatened. Pulling back forces them to confront what they've been taking for granted, and suddenly the dynamic they treated as predictable becomes something fragile and uncertain. This realization doesn't just affect them. It affects you. You start seeing how long you've been carrying more than your share. You start recognizing the effort you've been giving without acknowledgement. You start noticing the excuses you accepted and the behaviors you tolerated. And as that awareness grows, you begin to understand that their undervaluation was not a reflection of your worth, but a reflection of the dynamic you allowed to continue. You were overfunctioning. You were compensating. You were showing up at a level they never had to match. And once you see that clearly, you can't unsee it. It becomes the catalyst for change, not out of bitterness, but out of self-respect. Walking away, or even stepping back, is often the first time you put your value on display in a way that cannot be ignored. You're not punishing anyone. You're recalibrating the dynamic. You're establishing a new standard that says your presence requires effort, not assumption. You're signaling that reliability isn't something people get for free. And most importantly, you're reminding yourself that your consistency is a gift, not an obligation. When you walk away from a space where your effort is undervalued, you open the door to environments where your presence is recognized and respected. People who want to keep you will step up. People who are only comfortable will fall away. And both outcomes serve your growth. When you finally walk away, something powerful happens that you can't fully understand until you feel it for yourself. The weight you carry, trying to be enough for people who never acknowledged your effort, begins to lift in quiet, unexpected ways. The constant second guessing fades, replaced by a clarity that only distance can create. Your nervous system stops bracing for disappointment from people who never intended to show up differently. Your mind becomes quieter because you're no longer negotiating your value in spaces that never honored it. You begin seeing the truth you couldn't see while you were busy holding everything together. You notice how drained you had become, how much you had normalized, how often you settled. And as that awareness grows, you start feeling something unfamiliar yet deeply empowering, peace, the kind that comes from choosing yourself even when it's hard. Walking away isn't an act of abandonment, it's an act of alignment. You're not leaving them behind. You're returning to yourself. You're closing the chapter where your worth was debated and opening the one where it's non-negotiable. At first, it feels strange because you spent so long fighting for spaces that never fought for you. You might even feel guilt, not because you did something wrong, but because you're finally doing something right. You're breaking patterns you were trained to tolerate. You're choosing self-respect over approval. You're choosing truth over comfort, and though it feels unfamiliar, it's also the first step toward becoming the version of you that doesn't dilute themselves to be accepted. Walking away is what makes room for the life you kept postponing while waiting for others to catch up. The moment you distance yourself, your world begins to shift in ways that don't always make sense immediately. New opportunities appear where stagnation once lived. Your energy returns in ways you forgot were possible. You start noticing people who treat you with respect the first time without needing to be taught or reminded. You feel a renewed ambition because you're no longer pouring your potential into empty hands. You find yourself dreaming again because nothing and no one is quietly draining you. The clarity that distance provides allows you to see your future without filtering it through the limits others placed on you. And slowly, without forcing it, you begin moving toward environments that reflect your value rather than undermine it. Walking away teaches you something that staying never could. Not everyone deserves access to you. You begin learning that access is earned through consistency, respect, and effort, not through proximity or history. You start treating your time like an investment instead of an obligation. You start recognizing behavior patterns you once excused as harmless. You stop negotiating your worth with people who only show up when it benefits them. You learn the difference between someone who values you and someone who values what you do for them. And more importantly, you begin trusting yourself again, trusting your instincts, your boundaries, and your capacity to rebuild without the people you once thought you needed. As you grow stronger in your decision, the world reacts in predictable ways. Some people will be surprised because they never realized how much you were carrying. Some will be uncomfortable because your growth demands change they're unwilling to make. Some will try to return when they see you rising, not because they value you, but because they miss the convenience of your presence. But you won't be the same person they once took for granted. Distance reshapes you. Healing rewires you. Growth upgrades you. And once you experience what life feels like when you're no longer settling, you'll never shrink yourself again for the comfort of people who couldn't meet you where you were. The most powerful part of walking away is realizing that your value didn't change. Your environment simply wasn't capable of recognizing it. You didn't become more worthy the moment you left. You just stopped accepting situations that misrepresented your worth. You stopped auditioning for roles you had already mastered. You stopped staying loyal to dysfunction. You stopped fighting for validation that was never going to come. And once you release those patterns, your energy becomes magnetic. People begin responding to you differently because you respond to yourself differently. Your confidence becomes clearer, your boundaries become stronger, your standards become higher, and everything you attract begins to match the level you've grown into. Walking away teaches you that your peace is more valuable than anyone's approval. You realize that you'd rather disappoint others than betray yourself. You realize that being alone is better than being surrounded by people who make you feel unseen. You realize that choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary, and that necessity becomes the foundation for the next chapter of your life. A chapter where you build connections based on mutual respect, not convenience. A chapter where you pursue opportunities that align with your vision, not your fears. A chapter where you finally prioritize your growth instead of shrinking for others. Walking away becomes the moment everything shifts, not because the world changes, but because you do. This is the truth that comes with distance. You don't lose people when you walk away from what undervalues you. You lose limitations. You lose the weight of expectations that were never yours to carry. You lose the version of yourself that tolerated the bare minimum. And in return, you gain the strength to rewrite your story. You gain the confidence to demand more from the world. You gain the clarity to recognize what genuinely deserves your time and what doesn't. Walking away is not the end of something small. It's the beginning of something bigger, something aligned, something worthy of who you're becoming. And you deserve every bit of it. Because in the end, choosing to walk away isn't just about letting go, it's about upgrading your life in ways you never imagined. It's about stepping into your power instead of waiting for others to acknowledge it. It's about trusting that you are capable of building a life where respect is standard, not optional. And the moment you embrace that truth, you unlock a future that finally matches the value you've had all along.